This program airs statewide on California Public Television and is a California's Gold classic. This series is endorsed by the California Teachers Association, the California School Boards Association, and the California Library Association.
Hi, I'm Huell, and here we are at the corner of Magnolia and Arlington in the city of Riverside in Riverside County in Southern California. Now we're standing by California Historical Landmark number 20, which just happens to be this beautiful big old navel orange tree. And what makes this tree so historic is that it was brought here back in 1874, originally from Brazil. And from this tree sprang forth the entire commercial citrus industry for the state of California. This is the tree that started it all. This tree is a first, which is what this adventure is all about, because we're getting ready to travel all over our state in search of other California firsts. And I think you're going to be surprised at some of the firsts we discover. So as always, if you're up for the adventure, you're invited to come along with us as we continue our search together for California's gold.
For years, California history students have been taught that the state's first gold discovery was made in 1848 at Sutter's Mill in the foothills above Sacramento. In fact, this painting, loaned to us by the California Department of Parks and Recreation and entitled Marshall Discovering Gold, shows that exact moment in 1848 that changed life in California forever. But we had heard from reliable sources that actually gold was discovered in California years earlier and several hundred miles to the south. And in our never-ending quest for the truth, we headed out to find this place. Now to get there, we went north from Los Angeles on the 5 freeway, then cut east on Highway 14 and took the Placerita Canyon exit. We were headed for Placerita Canyon Natural Area, owned by the state and operated by the Los Angeles County Department of Parks and Rec. Located near the town of Huell in the Santa Clarita Valley, this is a beautiful area. And as we quickly learned, it's also one of the most historic places in our entire state.
What happened here, it was March 9th, 1842, when Francisco Lopez was visiting his niece out here at the Rancho San Francisco, which takes up most of the Santa Clarita Valley. It was his 40th birthday, and he was going out to check on his cattle. He had cattle out here on the ranch, on his niece's ranch. So he came up the canyon here, and along about noon decided to take a siesta. So he settled down under the tree, had a little Indian servant with him named Juan, and Juan laid out a blanket, put a saddle down there, and he took a nap. After lunch, or after his siesta, he decided that he remembered what his wife had told him. His wife, Maria, had said, while you're out there, gather up some seasoning for our dinner tonight, because we're going to have a birthday party for you, right? So Francisco remembered that, and so he went over here. And actually, they say the Oak of the Golden Dream is where he found the gold, but he actually got up, walked over to this little grove right over here, and he saw these wild onions growing.
Now, I don't see any wild onions
I don't
today.
either. But he took out his sheath knife, began digging up these onions in here, and lo and behold, as he pulled them up, he saw little flakes of gold on the roots. And of course, he had an education in mineralogy. He knew what he was looking for, and he'd found it. So he starts digging up the hillside, and apparently the Indian servant thought he was nuts. But he jumps up and says, I found it, I found gold. He goes back to the ranch house and informs the assembled crowd there that he'd found gold. And so they decided maybe the best thing to do would be to take it down to Los Angeles. Juan Temple had the only safe south of the Tehachapi Mountains. So they decided that would be the best thing to do, put the gold in the safe there.
Well, now, wait a minute. How much gold did he find that afternoon?
That afternoon, he probably found maybe an ounce or maybe two.
Would it have been enough to like fill up his hand?
Oh yeah, he would have had a nice little handful there that he'd gathered up in that afternoon.
So he took it down to Los Angeles.
Right.
Now, did the word spread? What happened?
Well, it's a kind of a strange thing because his niece, Donna Jacopa, was married to a guy named Captain Jose Salazar. Salazar was the head of a band of miners. They called them Gambesinos. And apparently Salazar immediately picked this up, and while everybody else went to town, he got his miners out here, and they started tearing up the creek looking for the gold. And most of it went into Salazar's pockets because in those days there wasn't the mining activity that we think of today. It was done in a rather, you might say, primitive way.
So wait a minute, why didn't this start the same kind of a gold rush that was started 6 years later up at Sutter's Creek?
That's a good question. Nobody really seems to know. It might have been the attitude of the Mexican government. At that time, there was a lot of people coming into California from other places, and they were deathly afraid of being overrun. I think the Mexican government did as much as possible to suppress this knowledge, although a sample was set by Abel Stearns off to the Mint in Washington, D.C., and they gave a very glowing report, back to Stearns about it.
So this was good gold?
Oh, yeah, nothing wrong with it at all.
Was there a lot of it around here?
Well, Stearns says in his write-up on it that every year they took about 260 pounds of gold out of this canyon. And if you add that up, see, the gold rush was interrupted, you might say, in 1847 when the Mexican-American War broke out. And the miners, the Gambesinos in here, thought it'd be best to go back to Sonora, Mexico, where they came from. So they hightailed it back to Mexico, very prudent, get out of the way of the war.
And then in 1848, all heck broke loose when they discovered gold up north from
Exactly,
here. But it's interesting that the gold was actually discovered. I thought you were going to say it was under this tree. That's kind of the famous tree where everybody thinks it was discovered. Right. But actually, the gold was discovered right here.
Right here.
In 1842 by Mr. Lopez, who was digging for wild onions.
Right, yeah.
Now that is a little known fact.
That's a little known fact, very little known. Everybody, like I said, talks about the gold up north. As I mentioned, there was about 260 pounds of gold a year, according to Stearns, that came out of here. And if you add that up and use today's exchange, what is about $350 an ounce, we're talking $7,600,000 worth of gold.
Came out of Southern California.
Out of Southern California.
Right here.
Right here. Yeah.
Is there any gold left?
Every so often they go down the creek and do a little panning, although the county parks frowns on it because...
Did they pan for gold in the creek?
In the creek.
You have brought a little exhibit here as we finish up that shows the gold.
There's the gold.
Now that is the kind of, that's real gold?
That's real gold.
That isn't the gold he found.
Well, no, it wasn't personally in his hand, but it was, from this area here.
So this is the kind of gold that he would have dug up out of the ground that day he was looking for wild onions.
Exactly, yes.
Wow. And there he is, right there, Francisco Lopez.
Right.
A name that is not that well known.
No, and generally if he's mentioned at all, it'll be kind of a footnote someplace, and they'll say some itinerant herdsman may have found some gold. But it's very well documented how much he found and where he found it.
Well, John Marshall may be the name that everybody knows, but Francisco Lopez is the name of the guy who found it first.
He did it first.
And he found it right here under these trees, looking for wild onions on March the
9th, 1842.
1842, and there's the Oak of the Golden Dream, which has to be the most historic tree around, because if he hadn't been taking a nap under that tree, he never would have found the gold over here.
Yeah. And if his wife hadn't nagged him a little bit to go find some spices for the evening meal, he might not even bother to walk over there.
So really, we should give credit to Mrs. Lopez.
Yes.
She's the one who is responsible for gold being discovered first.
Absolutely, she's the one, because if
California.
It wasn't for her, he wouldn't have been digging those onions up.
Thanks a lot. This
You're very welcome.
Great.
Thank you. Come back again.
Now it's time to talk about black gold. And when most of us think about oil in California, we think about the huge oil fields of Southern California. It was here, from the vast Midway Sunset Field near Bakersfield to the famous field in Signal Hill near Long Beach, that the California oil booms occurred from the 1890s through the 1930s. And even today, they're still going strong. But to visit the location of California's first successful drilled oil well, you gotta head north, way north. Welcome to Humboldt County, where at first we thought we were going to be fogged in. But before long, we were out of the fog and heading south from Eureka. Our route took us through the lovely little town of Ferndale, which is filled with carefully restored and brightly painted shops and homes. Then we headed west out to the coast on a highway that I'm not sure even has a number. I do know this, though, it is one of the most spectacular scenic routes I have seen anywhere in our state. For miles, the road literally hugged the coast, and there were unbelievable vistas. This part of the state is known as the Lost Coast and is almost completely undeveloped. It's really breathtaking. But we weren't on a sightseeing excursion. We were in Humboldt County looking for oil. The story is that way back in 1865, oil was discovered and actually commercially drilled for a while here. There was a general excitement among the locals that back then this was going to be oil territory. They even named the town near where it was first discovered Petrolia. Well, the oil boom of 1865 was short-lived, but the tiny little community of Petrolia is still around. And right in the middle of town is a plaque which clearly states that this was indeed the site of California's first drilled oil well. Now, we had been invited up to Petrolia by Lynn Chambers and some of her friends, who had volunteered to take us to the exact spot where this famous but obscure well is located.
Now we're getting ready to go out on a true adventure, aren't we?
That's the way I understand it.
Where is it exactly? How far?
Way up yonder.
Now, they weren't kidding when they said way up yonder, 'cause to get to where we were going, well, I guarantee you nobody but a local could have even found it. We're talking windy, bumpy, and finally going where it didn't even look like there was a road. Destination: private property, about 5 miles out of Petrolia, to a beautiful isolated spot. And there, under a thick growth of trees, we found the well. Now, by using a mirror and reflecting the sun, we could actually see the oil down in the hole. And then, by dropping down a coffee can on a string, we were able to retrieve and take a close look at that historic oil.
You can take that and run it in a diesel motor the way it is, but it really should be, filtered, scrubbed. Otherwise, it eventually will foul up your motor, but it will run in a diesel, yeah.
You could put this in a car, right?
I put this in my little Chevy bug thing that in 1933 or 34, somewhere in one of those years.
And of course, it's proclaimed to have all kinds of magical powers. I don't know, I haven't done it, but I've been told that it's great to just rub it onto your skin and leave it, that the old timers say it's fantastic for arthritis. It helps their arthritis. I do know it is a marvelous penetrating oil. I use it in place of like WD-40. It just removes or loosens bolts off of nuts that are frozen on. It's great for that. I have used it, and I will attest that it's great for a flea killer. I have put it on my dogs, poured it down their back, and they don't have fleas. Their hair just gets shiny and slick for 2 or 3 months, and I do know that. I've had it on my hands and not washed it off, and it doesn't bother your hands. It doesn't dry your hands. There's nothing wrong with it. It is supposedly, when they originally drilled, this oil was kind of destined for medicinal purposes, and I think that it probably is capable of that.
Now, how much more can we take out of here before we have to apply for some kind of a license?
I don't think any. We're only going to take a couple of gallons.
I just don't want a bunch of oil and gas officials to be watching us now and say, what are you boys doing out there?
Well, you know, they might do that.
This is
That's part of the equipment.
the original
Yeah,
equipment.
oh yeah, oh yeah. All this is, even the cable.
And it's just been sitting here for 130 years?
Yeah. Yeah, they packed it in, but nobody wanted to pack it out. That's the only way they could have got it in here is on a mule back, on a mule train. There was no roads or nothing like that in here.
It's kind of nice that it's all just still kind of sitting here.
Yeah, yeah, just the way they left it. Did you get a picture of the equipment here?
Yeah,
Look at the size of it. Look how big it is. It's unbelievable. It's too bad these trees are down over it so you can see it better. But
Well, that kind of adds something to
you know,
it.
that gear alone would be about all a mule could carry.
When they struck oil in 1865, did they think this was going to be a big oil
Oh, yeah.
boom town area?
Yeah, they really thought that this was going to go. The I don't know just which well it was. It wasn't this beginning well, I don't think, but the silver barons that made all their money in the Virginia City silver mines, Sutro and Stanford and all those San Francisco guys, they formed a company called the Atoll Union Oil Company. And they came up here, and they were going to really turn their millions into more millions.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of went kaput. It never panned out, mainly because of transportation. They just couldn't get the stuff out of here.
Yeah.
It isn't that it's not, but and also the geologists. I've talked to some geologists that come in, modern geologists, who say there's oil here, but it's in very small pockets,
Yeah.
and there isn't enough to pay for getting a truckload out of here.
Well, it lasted for a while, didn't it?
Yeah, several years.
I hadn't gotten any on my hands yet. How are you going to get that off?
Now you can't say that.
Pour a little bit on my hand here, and let's
Okay,
see what
you
it...
betcha. Hold our rock from getting away.
Oh, look at that. A little bit more. Look at that.
It's very high grade, whatever.
And this is probably the most historic oil I'll ever hold in my hand. This is from California's first drilled oil well.
That's correct. That's what it's supposed to be, is this one right here.
Out in the middle of... Where are we?
I don't know. Wait, at Taylor's Peak.
Wherever we are, it's historic, and we found the hole. There it is, right there. Ah, good old electricity. Something we definitely take for granted these days, and something we associate with Thomas Edison, who was headquartered back east. But it turns out that California played a major role in the development of electricity. We had a first. Here's the story. In the early days of electricity, they had to produce it very close to where they actually used it. There were all kinds of private electric companies that used coal and steam and water to generate the electricity. But the whole process was hampered by the fact that these generating facilities had to be located almost right outside the back door of where it was being used. And then in 1895, something happened right here in California that changed everything. Now, this historic event took place in the historic town of Folsom, and that's exactly where we headed to check it out, driving in over the American River on a beautiful morning. Our destination was the Folsom Powerhouse, which is not only a state historic park, but is also on the National Register of Historic Places, and for good reason. I'm Huell.
Yeah, gone fast. I'm chair of the docent group here at the old Folsom Powerhouse. Welcome.
Well, we are excited to be here because, quite frankly, when we started doing research on this, I had never heard of this place. It's a little out of the way, a little off the beaten track, but this place literally was a landmark place in history as far as California was concerned.
Yes, 100 years ago, July the 13th of 1895, this started off. and it was the long-distance transmission, 22 miles to the city of Sacramento, 11,000 volts, alternating current, three-phase power. Powered streetcars, and all the way it picked up some of the dredgers that were operating in the area. It also provided street lighting and some industrial and commercial lighting. So it was a big send-off for California.
Now, some of that sounds a little, I know you're an engineer, and some of that sounds a little technical to me, but let me decipher what you just said.
Go right ahead.
The idea was that in 1895, this big old powerhouse went into operation. Is that right?
That's right.
And it transmitted electricity from here 22 miles to Sacramento.
Right.
Now, what was the big deal about that? 22 miles doesn't sound very far today.
Well, that was the first time the long-distance transmission at 11,000 volts had been made. The direct current operations that were in vogue at the time were limited in the distance that it could be transmitted. So this was the capability of taking power from where the source of water was available and moving the power to where it could be used in a metropolitan area like Sacramento.
So it opened up.
It opened up the spread of the country so they could develop virtually anywhere, and you could move the power to the user from any place.
So that would depend, though, on being close to water.
Yes.
And that's why we have to go up this hill.
We'll go up to the forebay
to really start the tour.
Started.
Not in the powerhouse, but in what went into the powerhouse to make the electricity.
Right. Well, this is where it began. They diverted the water out of the American River about 2 miles upstream into this canal. They built the canal here, brought the water down into the forebay. This accumulates the water so you have a steady flow into the turbines.
So the water would have been coming under this bridge from the American River.
Yes. And these, you can see the sunshine there. The slats kept any debris out. These fences here prevented the water from swirling around, and then the gates there that are in that wall open up to go into the penstocks down into the turbines.
So if we had been here 100 years ago, there would have been all kind of water.
This would have been
churning
filled.
and making a lot of noise. And
this water was actually up to about a depth of 8 feet here.
Oh, wow. Now these are the original turbines right here?
These are the generators, the original generators. These are 750 kilowatts. There are 4 of them, so that gives you the 3 megawatt capacity of the facility.
Now, how could these things have been here all this time and not have been replaced and modernized and updated?
Well, they operated for the 57 years, and they were maintained during that period of time. After that time, of course, there was no further use for them, so they have just been sitting here idle. But this is the original board, has the original meters on it.
That would have been put here in 1895.
In 1895. This is Tennessee marble. It has an aesthetic appearance, and it's very easy to keep clean. It also prevents any shorting of the electrical. Between these 2 blades here, you have 800 volts. This marble will not let that current pass through to short that out. It also is about 2 inches thick, so it supports the electrical equipment necessary, and it also is fireproof. So if anything happened behind the board, the operator was relatively safe being
Look
here.
at all these old dials and levers, and what would this have been? Can I pull this down?
There was a switch. You may be able to pull it down. Go ahead and try it there.
Yeah, still works.
Still works. The only thing, we didn't get any electricity out of it.
You know, I'm having a hard time understanding electricity even today. Back then, very few people knew anything about electricity.
That's very interesting, because if Edison had had his way with direct current, this country would look like a porcupine's back with DC plants all over the place. Along comes alternating current, the stuff you just said you don't know too much about. Well, even 100 years ago, the people operating this plant didn't know too much about it. So they were starting off from scratch with their knowledge. And they had to learn this business of generating electrical power from the bottom.
So they were true pioneers.
True pioneers. That's why we describe this plant as the last pioneering effort to create the standard that we have today, three-phase, 60-cycle alternating current.
And the fact that it was 22 miles was a huge deal back then.
Fantastic. Today it isn't peanuts, but 100 years ago, fantastic. That's why they had this big Grand Electrical Carnival downtown that we're talking about.
They lit up the state capitol literally with light bulbs.
They put a beam up on top of the capitol that rotated. They had thousands and thousands of lights, all powered from this plant, to celebrate this big event, the arrival of alternating current. Wow. And that was the reason for this Grand Electrical Carnival, which is fantastic.
More people should know about this place.
It started right here, and it will remain here as long as we can keep this place going as a historical monument, which it is, and as long as we can keep the doors open for the public to come in and get the advantage of seeing the equipment and actually hearing the explanation of the basic start of this wonderful energy we call electricity. This is where it all began.
Well, we end our adventure riding on another California first. This is the Pasadena Freeway, which connects downtown Los Angeles with downtown Pasadena. Dedicated back in December of 1940, back then it was called the Arroyo Seco Parkway. And it was an 8-mile stretch of highway, 2 lanes of traffic going in each direction, beautifully landscaped with a big grassy median in the middle. And it holds the distinction of being the very first freeway in the entire state of California. Today, over 50 years after it was dedicated, it still retains a lot of its charm and character, especially its old bridges and tunnels. There are over 4,000 miles of freeway in California these days, but this holds the distinction of being the very first. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this adventure as we've traveled around our state looking at some of our firsts. And if you had a good time, as always, you're invited to come on along with us again next time as we all continue our search together for California's gold. Goodbye, everybody. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Huell Hauser, and I sure hope you enjoyed this adventure. If you'd like to see it again or share it with your family or friends, or perhaps donate a copy to your local school or library, it's available on video cassette and on DVD. All you have to do is call 1-800-266-5727, and we'll be glad to send it to you right away.